Hi, I am KBXF. And I would like to show you the possibilities and functionality of my product, Scene Favorites Tools. First, I would like to show you how it works, and then I will present the most important embedded tools and functions in more detail. But before I start, I want to point out the problem for which I wanted to create a solution. Once you have an idea of what a new scene should represent, the search for suitable characters, clothing, and props begins. Then you search through your catalog to find the potentially suitable assets. And this is where the problem begins. Where do I put the assets, and how do I remember potentially suitable products? How can I find them again later, and use them easily to test the various options? This is exactly where the Scene Favorites tools come into play. The first goal was not to have to categorize the candidates, or do other things that rebuild the catalog, and lose your positioning. Instead, the candidates should be stored as quickly as possible, in a common location directly in the scene. The second goal was to be able to use the saved candidates directly in the scene from a shared board. This to be able to insert, show and hide them, in order to try out the possible options efficiently. The third goal was to be able to control the viewports from the board. All of this has been implemented in order to have to leave the board as rarely as possible. And now, let's take a look at how these goals were achieved and what the tools can do for you. The tools can be used directly from the content library or smart content. Of course, it is faster and more efficient if you use custom actions, or even create shortcuts. For this demo, I have put the actions in their own menu. This makes it easier to see which action is being executed. Products and assets can be picked up from any tab of the Smart Content and the Content Library. But be careful. The Favorites board only accepts products and DUF assets. Older formats, scripts, and other formats are ignored by the Quick Picker. Once the desired assets have been selected, they can be transferred to the Favorites board using the Quick Picker. This is of course not a one-off process. New products and assets can be added to the Favorites board at any time. After the Quick Picker has transferred the elements to the Favorites board, a summary is displayed. If the display is not desired, it can be switched off using the Quick Picker Configurator tool. Once your board has been created, it is recommended to save the scene. This allows you to reintegrate the board into your scene if the board is accidentally lost when loading the first asset. And now, let's take a closer look at the most important functions of the Favorites board. When the board is opened for the first time, it starts with its minimum size. However, you can adjust the size to suit your requirements. The next step may be to add an asset to the scene. Next, you will see that the name of the asset is highlighted in yellow. This indicates that the board has created links between the element and the node in the scene. Links are the concept that establishes the connection between the board and the scene. In the Link Manager, you can see that links have been created for each node and its subnodes. However, this only applies to subnodes that are not bones. The Elements section highlighted in red indicates that no actions can currently be carried out there. If a bone is to be linked to a board element, this can be done manually. To do this, the bone must be the primary selected node in the scene. This can be achieved by selecting it in the Selection combo box. If this is too cumbersome, you can also leave the board for a short time. Once the desired bone has been selected in the scene, you can switch back to the board. The bone can now be linked to the desired element, using the Link Primary Node action. As additional assets are always attached to the primary node selected in the scene, this must be set again. An additional option to achieve this is the Link Manager. In its context menu, the selected node can be made the primary selected node in the scene. Further assets can now be added to the figure. Before we look at the other actions and options of the board, let's take a look at the Viewport Control Manager. The Viewport Control panel allows you to control your viewports directly from the board. The viewport to be controlled can be selected from the visible viewports at the top. The camera to be used for the viewport can be selected below. To define the pivot point for the pivot mode, the camera can be framed and aimed at the primary selected node in the scene. You can then switch to pivot mode to fly around the node and view it from all sides. To get a better impression of what the final render will look like, you can select the target draw style for the viewport. Is it necessary to control several nodes at the same time? If so, a group can be formed. One element acts as a proxy and is linked to all others. This can be achieved via the Link Manager. At least one link is selected from each element to be linked, except the proxy element. The links are copied and pasted into the proxy element. Once this is done, the nodes can be switched off and on together, for example. The visibility of elements can also be easily changed in the Element section. To do this, hold down the Alt key and click on the desired element. For the next example, I created a new group for the Urban Fierce outfit. In addition, I created a simple scene to use as a group proxy for the two groups. Then all the links of the two existing groups were added to the group proxy. If you now change the visibility of the group proxy, it switches back and forth between the two outfit groups. As you can see, the use of the links is seemingly unlimited. Another point is the foot positions. If we have the corresponding element in the board, we can simply use it. For the Urban Fierce outfit, however, there is currently no element in the board to set the foot position correctly. Before searching for a long time, you can click on the element while holding down the Control and Alt keys, and simply navigate to the product in the Smart Content. The missing asset can then be added to the board from there. Now both foot position elements are on the board, but it may be difficult to assess which element is suitable for which shoes. To do this, you can use the board configuration and change the sorting of the elements to the product sequence. Elements that belong to the same product now appear next to each other, making it easy to assign them. Are there a lot of elements on the board that are not needed for the next step? To see all the elements, would the board have to be enlarged in such a way that other important areas would be obscured? Would you have to scroll too much in a smaller board to access all the elements you need? Then simply temporarily banish the elements you don't currently need from the board. You can conjure them up again later. But be careful. If you leave the board with hidden elements, they will be permanently deleted from the board. It is therefore certainly advisable to leave the board briefly from time to time to save the scene and thus the board. This way, you are prepared for the worst-case scenario, and can restore the scene, and therefore the board. Next, look at the poses and expressions. You can of course also apply these directly from the board. If the pose does not meet your expectations, you do not have to search long for the right reset asset. You can simply undo this step with the undo action. The same applies to facial expressions, of course, where this function may even be extremely helpful. The Scene Favorites tools offer even more features than those shown in the video. And all of them are described in great detail in the 23-page user manuals in English and German. There. That was an overview of the possibilities of the Scene Favorites tools. Thanks for watching this video. Good night, and good art!